Houston Astros stealing signs to help them win the 2017 World Series. Harry and Meghan and their decision to step down from their royal duties. The impeachment trial currently going on in the Senate. While these three things may appear to have little in common, they can all be summed up using just one word: scandal. And when I think about scandals, two things come to mind. First, we, and especially the media, have an insatiable appetite for them. Whenever a scandal occurs, people seem drawn to the controversy. And we can be sure that the media will give us non-stop coverage of it. And second, there is always a new scandal on the horizon. We don't know exactly what it will be, who it will involve, or when it will occur. But the truth is, it is only a matter of time until the next scandal captures our attention. Obviously, this is not a new phenomenon, as history is filled with scandalous events. In fact, the Apostle Paul addresses one from his own day, one that completely rocked the world 2,000 years ago. Here is how Paul describes it to the Corinthians. For Jews demand signs, and Greeks desire wisdom. But we proclaim Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. Christ crucified, that was the major scandal facing the people in Corinth. The reason that this was so scandalous is because the message of the cross was deeply controversial. It just didn't match people's expectations. To give you some background on the Corinthians, they could be divided into two groups. And while these groups held vastly different beliefs on many things, they were in one accord on this particular matter. Namely, that the cross of Christ was scandalous. The one group in Corinth was the Jews. Clearly, they had been waiting for the coming of their Messiah. And as you may know, they had very specific ideas of what this Messiah would do and how he would act. And frankly, Jesus did not live up to those expectations. Not even close. Jesus was not averse to offending the religious establishment. He was constantly disobeying their Sabbath regulations. He was quite open in associating with all the wrong kinds of people. And he even wreaked havoc in their temple, throwing out the money changers. No, Jesus didn't act like a Messiah in the eyes of the Jews. And while Jesus' life didn't measure up to their expectations, his manner of death convinced them that Jesus was no Messiah. According to their own law, by dying on a cross, Jesus was accursed. Deuteronomy plainly tells us, for anyone hung on a tree is under God's curse. Paul says that the cross of Christ was a stumbling block to Jews. And significantly, the Greek word that he uses here is scandalon. Hence our word, scandal. Thus, for many faithful Jews, it was legitimately scandalous to suggest that their Messiah hung on a cross and died in such an offensive way. The second group in Corinth was the Greeks, and they found the cross of Christ equally offensive. As lovers of wisdom, they were greatly interested in acquiring knowledge. In fact, there were some who believed that they possessed a special knowledge, one that lifted them above the earthly realm. For these individuals, the idea of the cross was foolishness, since it meant that God's only Son was subject to earthly suffering. And for them, that was truly scandalous. And so, for both the Jews and the Greeks in Corinth, the cross of Jesus Christ was a stumbling block. For one, it was a sign of weakness, not strength. For the other, it was a symbol of foolishness, not wisdom. Consequently, both of these groups rejected Paul's message because it did not fit with their image of the Messiah or God's wisdom. And while the cross of Christ was a stumbling block to some people in Corinth, I can't help but wonder if we don't have the exact opposite problem today. We don't find the cross even remotely offensive. We have come to accept it matter-of-factly. As I think about this, I am reminded of a story that suggests that even ELCA bishops may suffer from this problem. Having spent time around ELCA bishops for the past quarter of a century, I have observed two things about them. First, they are known for wearing large pectoral crosses, perhaps to show us just how holy they are. And second, they are notorious for putting those crosses in their shirt pockets. Also, noticing this trend, one pastor actually confronted her bishop, asking, "Why do you keep your cross in your shirt pocket?" Apparently, the bishop responded, "To be honest, it gets in the way when I'm doing things. Besides, it gets heavy and uncomfortable when it dangles around my neck for too long a period of time. It's just easier for me to put it in my pocket where it doesn't bother me." At that point, the bishop stopped speaking, realized what he was saying, was convicted by his own words, and pulled his cross out of his pocket. For those times when we take the cross for granted, for those times when we forget that the cross can get in the way and make us uncomfortable. May we remember that the scandalous nature of the cross should never be lost, not even in our day. To close, let me share with you two final thoughts about the cross, both of which I believe help to preserve its scandalous nature. First, may we never lose sight of the fact that the cross is the ultimate symbol of human sinfulness, of our rejection of God and God's ways. Jesus came to us, proclaiming a message of God's love and forgiveness, ushering in God's kingdom for us to see and to experience. And in response, we became offended and we rejected him. We nailed him to a cross and watched him die. Yes, the cross is indeed scandalous, for it is our response to Christ's claims and ministry. The cross is our bad news to God's good news. But thankfully, the story does not end there, because the cross is also the ultimate symbol of God's love toward a rebellious humanity, in reminding us that God's ways are different than our own. The Apostle Paul writes, "For the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength." The cross was the ultimate statement of how we rejected God's ways. But God had the final word, for God raised Jesus from the dead. And as a result of what God has done for us, we can now look at the cross in a new light. Thanks to God, the cross of Christ is now a sign of God's wisdom, a sign of God's immense strength, and a sign of God's unfailing love toward us. In a world that is filled with scandals, it occurs to me that this one is really worth sharing.